The town of Haven's Edge had always been a place where the seasons dictated life. Its small, rural streets wound lazily along the edge of the forest, lined with modest homes and weathered barns, and the people who lived there were sturdy and resilient. Life was simple, almost painfully quiet, but it had a rhythm, one dictated by planting, harvesting, and the occasional festival. Neighbors nodded across fences more often than they spoke, and gossip was a rare commodity, whispered behind cupped hands rather than shouted across porches. But 10 years ago, that rhythm was shattered. A storm descended without warning, unlike any the valley had ever seen. The wind tore through the treetops like a living beast, shrieking in protest. Rain fell in thick sheets, unrelenting and merciless, and the creeks swelled into rivers, overflowing into fields and roads. The storm was alive, aggressive, and it carried with it a sense of vengeance, as if the valley had angered something ancient. That night, Caleb Rowan was awake before anyone else. He was not a man given to early rising, but storms had a way of stirring him into action. Caleb wasn't just a farmer. He was the town's quiet hero. He had hands scarred by work, but hands that could coax life out of soil and command the power of a horse with the gentlest touch. Bram, his black stallion, moved alongside him in the barn, muscles coiled like springs, ears twitching at the first crack of thunder. The bond between man and horse was such that they seemed to share a single mind, a single instinct for survival and purpose. When Caleb saw the rising water threatening to trap his neighbors, he didn't hesitate. The storm was loud, almost deafening, but he called out to Bram, his voice steady, and the stallion answered, eyes wide and intelligent. "We have work to do, boy. Time to help them." He secured Eli to a saddle pad, wrapped carefully in his arms, knowing that the little boy's safety depended on Bram's strength and obedience. They rode into the chaos, the wind ripping through Caleb's coat and the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. Trees bent like reeds, debris tumbled along with the surge of water, and lightning split the sky in violent flashes. Bram's hooves struck the ground with thudding determination, each step deliberate as they navigated the flooded roads and mud-soaked fields. Caleb could hear the cries of neighbors, muffled by the storm but piercing nonetheless. Each shout was a call for help, and he answered, as he always had. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a silence heavier than any sound it had made. Water lay stagnant across the fields, trees were uprooted, and roads were fractured and impassable. In the aftermath, Eli was found near the edge of the ravine that bordered their property, shivering, soaked, and unconscious. Somehow, alive. Caleb was found later, lifeless, near the edge of the rushing water, his body battered by nature's rage. Bram, the loyal companion, the horse that had never left Caleb's side, had vanished entirely. The official story was neat and simple. Caleb Rowan had died in a heroic accident, saving his son. It was a tale of bravery and devotion, one that the townspeople recited with solemn nods and heads bowed. But beneath the surface, whispers lingered. In darkened corners, near fireplaces where the wind carried the smoke of burning logs, people muttered about strange things. The sheriff had arrived unusually early, almost as if he had known something the rest of the town didn't. Voices had been raised above the storm, sharp and terrified, and a sound had echoed in the aftermath that no one could forget. A scream of pure panic, not human, not ordinary, but the cry of a horse, long and agonized, that haunted the woods long after the rain stopped. Eli's mother buried herself in the routine of grief, keeping him close and the past at bay. But the town remembered, and so did the shadows. A storm like that left more than broken trees and fractured roads. It left suspicion, guilt, and the lingering, almost spectral memory of a horse's desperate cry, Bram's cry, echoing into eternity. And for Eli, the memory of that night, though shattered and incomplete, would never fully fade. 10 years had passed, but the night of the storm remained etched into the edges of Eli Rowan's mind like a half-remembered dream. Fragments, flashes, and echoes that refused to fade. He was 12 now, a boy shaped more by loss than by the innocence of childhood. His hair was dark and unruly, like his father's, and his eyes, large, somber, and unusually perceptive, seemed to hold a weight far beyond his years. The other children at school found him quiet, peculiar, but no one dared tease him. There was an unspoken understanding. Eli carried something unnameable, a gravity that demanded distance and respect. The memories were fragments, broken and jagged, appearing without warning. A flash of lightning that split the sky, his father's voice taut with fear and anger, the roar of wind, water, and branches snapping, a horse screaming, not the calm, disciplined cries of Bram he remembered, but a raw, agonized wail that seemed to pierce the bones. And then darkness. Always darkness. It wasn't just the memories themselves that haunted him, it was the questions they raised. How could Bram, the loyal companion who had never left his father's side, disappear entirely? And why had his father died while he, Eli, had survived? A small, insidious suspicion had begun to take root, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Had Bram somehow been involved? Had he betrayed them in the chaos? Or worse, abandoned his father? Eli carried the weight of that doubt quietly, afraid to voice it. Eli's mother, Ellen, lived as though the past were a dangerous beast lurking in the corners of the house. She avoided the stables entirely, never letting Eli near the ridge overlooking the ravine, and she buried the memories in silence. Every day was routine: school, chores, meals, sleep. But the silence was a fragile one, and Eli knew it. Her eyes sometimes flicked toward the old stables, and she would stiffen if a hoofbeat echoed from the woods. It was as if she were guarding a secret too terrible to share. The sheriff, a man named Harlan Webb, had been a shadow in Eli's life for as long as he could remember. Friendly on the surface, attentive, even protective, he'd helped with farm disputes, lent a hand during minor emergencies. But Eli never trusted him. There was something in the way he watched, always watching, as though waiting for a crack in Eli's composure. A subtle, uncomfortable scrutiny that made the boy's skin crawl. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a careful, predatory patience. Eli's quiet, measured life fractured on an ordinary Tuesday. The sky had been gray, heavy with clouds, but nothing unusual. He was walking along the ridge, lost in the muddled remnants of his memories, when he saw it. A stallion. The black horse stood atop a small rise in the pasture beyond the trees. Its coat was dark as midnight, wet with dew or rain, glistening with a strange sheen. Eli froze. Bram. There was no doubt. The horse's presence was overwhelming, majestic, and almost otherworldly. The muscles rippled under its skin, taut and powerful, a living testament to endurance and pain. Its eyes met Eli's, intelligent and mournful, carrying a depth of grief that mirrored his own. The horse's behavior was unsettling. It didn't approach, but it didn't flee either. It simply watched, its gaze unwavering. When Eli moved closer, the stallion remained still, almost expectant. But the moment his mother approached the window, the horse melted back into the forest, disappearing as if it had never been there. That night, Eli could not sleep. He lay in bed, listening to the house creak under the weight of the wind outside. A sound cut through the dark, chilling and familiar, a panicked, agonized cry echoing across the valley. He bolted upright. Bram. It had to be. The sound that had haunted him for a decade had returned, impossible and real. Over the next several days, clues began to appear as if the horse were deliberately leaving them. Hoof prints in the damp earth near the stables, perfectly round and distinct. too large to belong to any ordinary wildlife. Apples, the ones Eli left on the porch for him, vanished overnight, one by one, and every so often a low, mournful whinny drifted from the forest, chilling him to the bone. Despite the fear rooted in his father's death, Eli found himself drawn inexorably toward Bram. The first time he dared to leave water near the old stable, his hand trembling, the horse's nostrils flared, and he froze. Bram sniffed, then slowly stepped forward, ears alert. Eli spoke softly. "It's me, Bram. I'm not afraid." The stallion's massive head dipped slightly, as if acknowledging the words. A fragile bond began to form. Over days and weeks, Eli left apples, water, and whispered reassurances. Bram allowed him closer, though the horse's trust was never complete. And yet a shadow lingered over every step. Each time Eli reached out to touch him, Bram jerked, flaring his nostrils and snapping his gaze past Eli toward the house. Eli understood, deep in his heart, that the fear was not his. Bram feared his mother. That realization both terrified and fascinated him. The horse wasn't afraid of the boy. Bram was guarding him from something else, something hidden in plain sight. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deep oranges and purples, Eli's mother stepped outside. She froze instantly at the sight of the stallion on the ridge. Her body stiffened, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Get inside, Eli, now!" she hissed, voice low and sharp. "That animal is dangerous. He is a killer." Eli stepped forward, heart pounding, defiance and disbelief warring within him. "He's not dangerous, Mom. He's just watching. Why are you so afraid of him?" "I forbid you to go near that ravine again, do you hear me?" Her voice cracked, sharp with panic. "That horse, he should have stayed gone." The next morning, the sheriff arrived. Harlan Webb spoke with exaggerated concern about predator activity, stray livestock, and public safety risks, his words carrying an undercurrent of threat. Eli, listening from the doorway, heard snippets of a tense, urgent conversation in the kitchen. "He's back, Sheriff. After all this time, you have to get rid of him before Eli..." "Before Eli what?" Harlan's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "He was 3, Ellen. He doesn't remember anything. The trauma wiped it clean." "No, you don't understand," she cried. "He's getting close to the horse. The horse is triggering something. If he remembers..." Eli's heart hammered in his chest. Something had been hidden from him all these years. Caleb hadn't simply died in a heroic accident. Bram hadn't fled out of fear or malice. The pieces began to click into a horrifying new pattern. The storm, the ravine, his father, his mother, the sheriff, and the horse, all part of a secret long buried in fear and silence. After the heated exchange, Eli felt the weight of their secret pressing down harder than ever. The air around the ridge seemed charged, the forest heavy with expectation, as though it had been waiting for this moment all along. Every step he took toward Bram was a step closer to a truth that both terrified and exhilarated him. That evening, Eli approached the horse cautiously, feeling the tension in Bram's muscles before he even reached him. The stallion's ears flicked, nostrils flaring, but he did not retreat. His gaze was locked on Eli's, and for the first time, the boy sensed a faint recognition in those dark, knowing eyes, something beyond memory, beyond instinct. Bram seemed to measure him, to decide if he was worthy of trust. "Bram, I know you're not the enemy," Eli whispered, his voice trembling against the evening wind. He reached out slowly, fingers grazing the stallion's slick coat. Bram flinched, then relaxed, just enough to allow the touch. It was a small victory, but Eli felt it in his chest like a pulse of hope he hadn't known he could feel. Night fell, and with it came the restless sounds of the valley, the groan of trees, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. Bram remained near Eli, ears swiveling at every sound, muscles taut like coiled springs. Every so often, his gaze flicked toward the house, where the warm glow of light betrayed the presence of his mother. Eli understood that Bram's fear was not random. It was deliberate, purposeful, protective. The next day, Eli tried to test the boundaries of their trust. He led Bram to the edge of the pasture, the wind tugging at his hair, and whispered, "I'm not afraid of you, Bram. I know you were trying to protect me and Dad." Bram lowered his head, brushing the boy gently with his muzzle, as if acknowledging the truth of those words. It was a fleeting moment of connection, fragile but undeniable. But the shadow of fear never fully lifted. Each time Eli returned home, he would find his mother watching him from the window, her face tight with anxiety. Her eyes darted constantly toward the ridge, toward the forest, toward the horse that refused to leave. And with each glance, Eli felt the unspoken warning. Some truths are too dangerous, too volatile to be confronted. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between boy and horse deepened. Eli began to anticipate Bram's movements. The flick of an ear, the twitch of a nostril, the shift of weight before the horse moved. He spoke aloud, recounting fragments of what he could remember, telling Bram stories of his father, of the storm, of the times before the accident. Bram listened in silence, muscles relaxed just enough to allow the contact, eyes reflecting a grief and understanding that Eli had never witnessed in any living creature. Yet tension simmered beneath every interaction. One afternoon, Eli's mother appeared at the pasture, the sharp edge of panic in her voice cutting through the calm. "Eli, stay back! You don't understand! He's dangerous! Don't go near him!" she shouted, arms flailing. Bram froze instantly, nostrils flaring, ears pinned, muscles tensing as though preparing for a fight. Eli stepped forward, heart pounding. "He's not dangerous," Eli shouted back. "He's trying to protect me. Why can't you see that? Why are you so afraid of him?" For a brief moment, his mother's face wavered between fear and desperation. Then she turned abruptly and fled toward the house, leaving Eli and Bram alone on the ridge. The stallion's gaze returned to Eli, calm but watchful, as if reassuring the boy that he was right, that Bram was not the enemy, and that their secret, buried in fear and silence, was alive and waiting to be uncovered. The sheriff's presence lingered in the background like a storm cloud. Eli knew he was being watched, subtly monitored, though no one spoke of it openly. Every day felt like a delicate balance between freedom and danger, between trust and the looming threat of discovery. Bram, ever vigilant, seemed to sense the sheriff's intentions even when the humans could not. The horse's protective instincts were unwavering, his intelligence almost eerie, and Eli began to understand that Bram's return was not coincidence, it was the purpose. By the time another week passed, Eli had begun leaving the pasture gate slightly ajar, inviting Bram closer to the ridge where they could meet in secret. Each encounter became an unspoken ritual, a reaffirmation of trust, a test of courage, a quiet reclamation of power over a past that had once been defined by fear. Eli realized something profound. Bram was not just a horse. He was a sentinel, a witness, a living link to the truths of that stormy night that had forever changed their lives. And Eli, in turn, had become more than a boy afraid of ghosts. He was a participant in the unearthing of the past, learning to trust, to observe, to interpret the silent language of grief and loyalty. The forest, the ridge, and the valley itself seemed to hold its breath as the bond grew. Every whisper of wind, every shiver of leaves, every distant call of an animal was part of a rhythm Eli had only just begun to understand. Bram's watchfulness was no longer frightening. It was instructive. And Eli knew deep down that when the moment of revelation arrived, he and Bram would face it together. The storm had passed 10 years ago, but its echoes remained. Bram was the living pulse of that night, carrying memory, loyalty, and truth in every measured step, every tense muscle, every gaze that pierced through Eli's own uncertainty, and the boy, finally beginning to trust both the horse and himself, was ready, in a quiet, resolute way, to face whatever had been hidden for a decade. Eli awoke with a sense of urgency gnawing at his chest. The fragments of memory that had been teasing him for years now pressed forward with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating. He could no longer pretend that the night of the storm had been a simple accident. Something had happened at the ridge, something involving Bram, his mother, and the sheriff, and for the first time, Eli felt that he had to confront it. He found his mother in the kitchen, the sunlight spilling over the polished counters, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped at the surface. The small domestic ritual, the cleaning, the careful organization, was an armor she had worn for 10 years, a defense against memory and guilt. Eli stood in the doorway, heart pounding, and asked the question that had been circling his mind like a hawk over prey. "What really happened that night?" he demanded, voice shaking but steady. "Why did you call Bram a killer?" Ellen froze mid-motion, the cloth in her hands slipping slightly. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The careful construct of 10 years, the daily rituals, the routine, the enforced silence, crumbled in a single heartbeat. "You don't understand, Eli. It was a terrible accident." "No," Eli interrupted, his small body rigid with defiance. "I heard you and the sheriff. You're afraid I'll remember. Tell me the truth, Mom. Please." Her body shook, a tremor born of years of guilt, fear, and suppressed grief. Her eyes, wide and unguarded for the first time, met Eli's, and she began to speak, her voice breaking in ragged bursts. "Your father, Caleb, he wasn't just riding out to help neighbors. He had discovered things, Eli, about the sheriff, about corruption, about relief funds meant for the storm victims, money your father had been planning to expose." Eli felt a cold shock run through him, the words sinking in. His father, the hero he had remembered, the celebrated horseman of Haven's Edge, had been fighting for justice, for truth, for integrity. That night, he wasn't just on his way to help. He was heading to a meeting with a journalist. He had proof of the sheriff's crimes, Ellen continued, voice trembling. I followed him to the stable. I didn't want him to go, but I was scared. And then the storm hit." Her confession spilled out like a flood, uncontrolled and desperate. Eli listened, heart hammering, as the missing pieces fell into place. He could see it. The ridge, the rushing water, the storm tearing through the trees. He could see Bram, tense, fearful, yet protective. "They argued. Your father. He confronted me too. I tried to stop him. Eli, I didn't know what would happen." Ellen's voice quavered. "And then the sheriff. He was there. He followed him somehow. I don't know if he expected the accident, but he intervened." Eli's stomach knotted, a mix of fear and dawning understanding. He saw the scene in his mind's eye, the confrontation on the ridge, voices raised above the storm, and Bram, sensing danger, rearing in instinctive protection. "Bram tried to protect us," Ellen whispered. He reared, he spun. I didn't see him as a protector, Eli. I saw a wild beast. I ran. I couldn't face it. I was so scared." The pieces fell into a terrifying alignment. Caleb had not simply slipped or fallen by accident. Bram had acted to protect him and Eli. And in the chaos of the storm, in the confusion of raised voices and wild panic, Caleb had fallen near the ravine, a tragic but unintended consequence of fear, misunderstanding, and intervention. Eli felt a surge of anger and grief, but also clarity. Bram was not a killer. Bram had been loyal, steadfast, and terrified in the only way a creature so intelligent could be when confronted with danger, confusion, and human conflict. "And the sheriff?" Eli asked, voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. Why did he let the story lie? Why frame it like an accident?" Ellen's face paled, guilt etched in every line. "Because, Eli, he could lose everything. His reputation, his power, and he forced me into the lie. I told everyone it was an accident. I framed the horse because I was scared. For you. For me. I couldn't face the truth." The room seemed to shiver with the weight of the revelation. Eli's mind raced, memories once hazy now snapping into horrific clarity. The lightning, the screams, the sound of the horse's panicked cry. Bram had been trying to protect him. Bram had been the keeper of the truth all these years, waiting for the moment when Eli could understand. "I have to see him," Eli said finally, determination cutting through fear. "I have to know it's true. I have to find Bram." "You can't, Eli!" his mother cried, panic sharpening her voice. "It's too dangerous. He will trigger memories and the sheriff. He's still around." Eli shook his head, feeling a mixture of fear and purpose. "I'm not afraid, Mom. I have to face it. I have to know the truth, and Bram knows it too. I can feel it." That afternoon, Eli slipped out toward the ridge. The wind tugged at his coat, and the distant trees whispered as if carrying the memory of that night. Bram appeared as he had before, towering, magnificent, and unmistakably aware. The black stallion's muscles rippled under the damp coat, eyes dark and intelligent, scanning for threats, yet softening as they met Eli's gaze. Eli approached slowly, voice low. "It wasn't your fault, Bram. You were trying to protect us. Dad, you were the one who tried to save him." Bram lowered his head, nostrils flaring in a slow, deliberate acknowledgement. The boy reached out, trembling, to touch the stallion's wet, slick neck. A shiver ran through him, a mixture of fear, awe, and relief. The past and present collided, violent and sudden, yet brimming with clarity. Eli knew what he had to do. The sheriff could no longer hide, his mother could no longer fear, and the truth, long buried beneath lies, silence, and decades of fear, was ready to breathe again. Bram, loyal and silent, was waiting, sentinel of memory and protector of life. Together, they were ready to face the storm that had never truly passed. The wind began as a whisper, a low sigh through the trees at the edge of the valley, but it did not take long for it to escalate. Dark clouds gathered over Haven's edge, swelling and roiling as if the sky itself were angry at a decade of lies and half-truths. Rain began to fall in thin threads at first, pattering on the roof of the Rowan house and slicking the dirt roads. Then it poured, solid and unrelenting, washing the valley in a gray, chaotic sheet. Eli clutched the fragments of truth in his mind, fragments that had finally aligned after 10 years of fear and silence. He felt a pull he could not resist, drawing him toward the ridge, toward Bram, and toward the place where the final piece of the puzzle had been hidden. The ravine. The familiar path was slick with mud, and the wind whipped at his hair, slicing across his cheeks. Yet he ran, heart hammering, every step a defiance of the fear that had bound him for so long. The storm mirrored the one from a decade ago. Lightning split the sky in jagged, blinding flashes. Thunder rolled like distant artillery, shaking the earth beneath his feet. And through it all came a sound Eli had carried in his nightmares for 10 years. A desperate, agonized cry that pierced the rain, cutting through the wind. Bram. The sound struck something deep in Eli's chest. It was not a scream of betrayal, but a cry of alarm, of determination, of loyalty and fear. In that instant, his fragmented memories crystallized into a violent, searing clarity. The storm, the ridge, his father's face taut with conviction. Caleb arguing with the sheriff, voice sharp with indignation, hands reaching, shoving, struggling, Bram rearing and spinning, caught between protection and panic. Eli strapped to Bram's saddle for safety, hidden behind the stallion's massive body. The slip, the fall, the sickening impact, his mother's panicked screams, the sheriff's forceful grip, his words insisting on silence. It had all been true, just as Bram's cry had told him. The accident had never been random. Bram had been protecting him, his father, and in the chaos had carried both witness and survivor through the storm. Eli stumbled forward, eyes wide, lungs burning, toward the place where the hunting party, Sheriff Webb and his men, were moving through the storm under the pretext of public safety. Their torches cut weak lines of yellow through the rain, but they were slow, unprepared for the terrain, unprepared for the fury of nature and the intelligence of a horse who had waited 10 years for this moment. And then Eli's foot slipped. The mud betrayed him, slick as it had been a decade ago, and he tumbled, sliding violently toward the ravine, toward the swollen, raging water that churned with logs and debris. His scream was swallowed by the roar of the storm. But Bram was there. A dark blur plunged into the chaos, ignoring the wind, the rain, and the memory of his own trauma. The stallion's powerful legs struck the earth and then the water, plunging into the torrent with impossible strength. He reached Eli just as the boy's descent became dangerous, wedging his massive body beneath him, absorbing the full impact of the current and debris. Bram's hooves churned against the waterlogged bank, his muscles straining, veins corded with effort. Every instinct, every ounce of strength, every heartbeat was focused on keeping Eli safe. "Bram! Hold on!" Eli screamed, clutching the stallion's mane, teeth clenched against the cold and the chaos. The wind tore at his coat, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the air. But Bram did not falter. He nudged, he lifted, he angled his body until Eli was safely pushed onto a patch of secure ground, the same spot where his father had stood 10 years ago, defiant and brave. The sheriff and Eli's mother arrived moments later, drawn by the frantic shouts, drenched and shouting against the storm. They saw Eli, shivering but alive, standing on the ridge, and beside him, Bram, exhausted and wounded, chest heaving, legs trembling beneath him. The black stallion's eyes met Eli's, dark and full of intelligence, and in that gaze was the unspoken truth. He had returned not as a threat, not as a predator, but as a guardian, a keeper of memory, a witness to the lies that had ruled the valley for 10 long years. Eli stood tall, trembling with relief and newfound understanding. His eyes, filled with the clarity of memory restored, fixed on Sheriff Webb. His voice, small but unyielding, cut through the storm. "You pushed him," Eli whispered, the words carrying across the torrential rain. "You killed him." The sheriff froze, the color draining from his face. His men glanced nervously at one another, realizing that the facade had shattered. Ellen sank to her knees, hands flying to her mouth, guilt and terror warring in her eyes. The weight of a decade of lies pressed down on all of them, and the truth finally emerged, unflinching, undeniable. Bram, sensing the culmination of his vigil, gave one last monumental effort. He pushed himself to his knees, then staggered upright, placing his hooves firmly on the exact patch of ground where Caleb had stood, as though claiming the ridge, the truth, and the memory that had been denied for so long. He lowered himself gently, exhausted but resolute, a sentinel of loyalty, protector of the innocent, and keeper of history. Dawn broke slowly, pale and weary, washing the ridge in soft light. Bram, silent now, exhaled one last time. His body sagged, and he lowered his massive head to the ground. Eli knelt beside him, hands trembling as they touched the stallion's sleek neck and whispered words that had waited 10 years to be spoken. "It was an accident. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't yours." The truth could no longer be denied. Investigations followed. Sheriff Webb's corruption was exposed, the lies revealed, and Ellen, finally freed from fear and shame, recounted the full story of Caleb's final night. The valley, once tense and silent under the weight of secrecy, seemed to breathe for the first time in a decade. Eli grew into the memory. He did not forget the pain, but the darkness that had clung to him lifted. Bram's cry, once a sound of panic and terror, became a reminder of loyalty, courage, and protection. He often visited the high ridge, no longer in grief, but in quiet reverence, understanding now that love and truth, though buried by fear and time, never truly disappear. They wait, patient, enduring, until the moment comes to set the world right. Thank you for listening. If this horse story stayed with you, feel free to like, subscribe, and explore more stories on the channel. Until next time.